I understand dopamine on a very basic level, and I understand the systems and our hormones in a very basic level.
Okay.
And from speaking to yourself, I'd love to get a more broad understanding for myself and my audience that of how these systems work together and how we can affect them ourselves day to day.
Okay.
I know a lot of your work was to do through addiction,
Yeah.
and I was very excited to kind of understand how we can look at using those addictive mechanisms for positive purposes within our lives.
Well, I think the basic tenet is, what is dopamine really doing in the brain, and why is it there? What's its role? Basically, that's what you're asking. It's a very complicated. Mental health in general is a very complicated situation, and it's not surprising when you think about the fact that we got billions of neurons floating around the brain. And very complicated. It's when you talk about artificial intelligence, we are even smarter than artificial intelligence. Okay. So
At the
we have
moment,
to consider that very much so. Okay. And although artificial intelligence is a very important potential for the future, because it lets us get our data really quick, and also it lays out problems for us that we might not really understand if we didn't use AI. It's not better than the human. And the human is always stronger than AI. So we have to keep that in mind. Now, with that stated, the I'm of the thinking, okay, that you can't look at the forest, okay, without understanding the trees, okay? And you got to
okay.
understand the trees, even to create a picture of the forest, okay? So I'm always looking for a reductionistic viewpoint of what's going on in the brain. Now, I've been criticized for that, okay? And there's been tremendous controversy on my work because of that, because people think that I'm too reductionistic, okay? And
Why do they think that?
well,
What has led them to think that?
because the brain is very complicated, and to come up with some kind of hypothesis or some kind of idea that this is the way it's really working, when you got such a complicated situation that you're dealing with, people could look at that and say, "Oh, well, how do you know that? And is that true? And what's the evidence? And this is not right. And you're missing all the complications of all the genes that are involved, and all of that." Okay.
Haven't we always done that?
Huh?
Because we've ne haven't we always done that? Because we've never had a full picture, and we'll possibly never have a full picture
Yeah.
of that forest, as you say. So isn't
Yeah.
in any way, any kind of experiment or any scientific process
Yes.
is in some sense doing that exact same thing?
Yeah. But you have to, in order to get at applications. See, I believe in translational medicine or translational biology, okay? Or translational genetics or translational genomics. Okay, when I did my work over now 60 years at least, okay, what I've been focused on is how could we take what we're doing and get it into the clinical level of utilization. Otherwise, you know, we might as well measure tsetse flies and all of that other stuff. Okay, that's okay to get some basic understanding, like the zebrafish and all of that good stuff, and the drosophila and all of that. That's great, but you have to eventually get what you're doing, if you're doing research, into some clinical application. That's been the tenet of my research for all these years. Okay, so when you do that, you have to consider the fact, like you just said, Bailey, we don't have the full picture yet. And what we're talking about now, believe me, you're a young guy. I don't know how young you are, but you're pretty young. Yeah, I'm an old guy. But we what does the future look like? Okay, and what we're saying now, with the concept, the fact that we could get even new technology, okay, other than optogenetics and all the great stuff that we got today, what is it going to look like 100 years from now? Okay. If we're still alive, if the world is still safe, I don't know. But if it is, it's going to look very different. Okay. But why are we living today? The question is, what does it look like now? Because we can't go any further than now. Okay. We could think about the future, but it's the now that counts. Okay. And I have written papers is that the future is now, which is probably not right, but it's just to get people who's thinking about it. Okay. The future is now for the moment, Okay. So when you think about dopamine, you have to think about the fact that in order to get the regulation of dopamine, and let's just take it in the brain, okay? And let's take a very important part of the brain, which is in the mesolimbic system of the brain, okay? Because that's where your clusters for emotion and craving behavior and all these wonderful things, even even it's involved in cognition because you have to have dopamine. So I just wrote a paper which has just got accepted in the Journal of Gene, Proteins, and Disease that suggested that of all the neurotransmitters that are in the brain, and by the way, there could be hundreds, but there's only really 6 or 7 or 8 systems that control the neurotransmitter systems that control the actual release of dopamine at the site that we call the reward site. It's called the nucleus accumbens. Okay. And when you release dopamine, it's not released just automatically. It has to go through a cascade of events, okay, that we call the brain reward cascade that involves from the hippocampus, okay, you know, uh, excuse me, from the hypothalamus projected, okay, into the substantia nigra, which projects into the VTA, which is ventral tegmental area, that causes the release of dopamine and the nucleus accumbens. And that is called the brain reward cascade. But it has to do with serotonin, okay? It has to do with the endorphins. It has to do with GABA. It has to do with acetylcholine, okay? It has to do with glutaminergic system, okay? And
So
all these
these
systems impinge cause the proper release of dopamine moment to moment to moment, okay? Now, when there is stress, for example, dopamine is released 100 times above normal rest. You know why? Because it has to actually combat another molecule which causes the stress. That's norepinephrine. So you have to
mm,
have the balance and the proper balance whereby the amount of dopamine that is quantum released is the right amount moment to moment to feel good. Okay? Now, think about this. What if you don't have the right amount of dopamine being released? What happens to you? Well, people that have post traumatic stress disorder, right? When they go to war, they do this. Well, their brain is not releasing the normal amount of dopamine moment to moment. Okay. And in fact, we know that the genetic integrity of the dopaminergic system and its regulation is not correct with people that have PTSD. And some people, when they go into war or they have events that are very traumatic, death and murder and God knows what, okay? Some people are more prone when those events happen, stays with them longer and it's harder to get out. And that's why a lot of the veterans are at the VA with PTSD, okay? Because it involves a gene, well, many genes, but one gene. It's called the dopamine D2 receptor gene, okay? Now, that gene is the gene that I discovered the first association with Ernie Noble and our group, published in JAMA in 1990 for alcoholism, severe alcoholism. But that gene has also been involved in PTSD and a lot of mental disorders, okay? So what I'm going to tell you about dopamine, because I'm going to answer the question, is dopamine is the command molecule that keeps us straight, okay? And when dopamine is altered in the downward direction, that's called hypodopaminergia. When it's in the upper direction, it's called hyperdopaminergia, okay?
Hmm.
Adolescents, for example, they actually can be born with either a normal amount of dopamine or a lower amount of dopamine, but because of environmental interactiveness, the stress that they have, the dopamine levels rise and go up. So if they use, for example, alcohol, guess what? We know that alcohol can cause the release of dopamine. And by the way, alcohol causes the release of dopamine, heroin causes the release of dopamine, stimulants cause the release of dopamine, like cocaine, and just just think about sex and other stuff that cause the release of dopamine. But if you're an adolescent, okay, and your dopamine is higher than normal, bango. When you drink alcohol, you really feel it. Okay.
Mm.
More so. And that's why a lot of people that actually there's a question in people that are alcoholic, they go into clinics and they ask the question, do you remember your first drink? And a lot of them remember it. Okay. I don't know if you do. You think?
I'm trying to think now. Is like, do I remember my first drink?
Do you
Is that
remember when you took your first drink?
I remember the first time I got really drunk.
Okay,
Not
there
my
you
first drink,
go. Oh,
but I
that's
remember
okay. But the
the
point
first time
is,
I got blackout drunk.
yeah, how old were you?
Ooh, 15?
15. Okay.
15, 16,
Well,
I think.
remember,
Yeah.
at that point, you had high dopamine. Okay.
Mm.
Now, as you go into adulthood, dopamine gets more stabilized. So that's why everybody is so concerned about young people before they reach the age of adulthood, which is, you say 18, but the real age of adulthood
Well,
is, you know what? By
um,
27,
25?
26.
25, yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
because you don't get myelation of neuronal fibers in the prefrontal cortex or the cingulate gyrus, which keeps you more stabilized. It gives you more decision making. How old are you now?
26.
You're okay. You're probably just on the border. You might be
I'm
making good
okay.
decisions, but you have less myelination in the area of the brain that allows you to think and make judgments. It's called the executive function. And that's in
What do you mean by
environment.
myelation? Is that related to the gray matter?
Yeah, the myelation, over to the neurons are not working. In other words, it's a sheet, and you got to get this fatty myelination to make everything work right. Okay, so
Okay, got you.
so you're just on the cups, okay, and we give you the benefit of the doubt.
I
So
don't know yet.
yeah, so that's why so many people are concerned about younger people because they're different than older people in the basis of even if the dopamine has been normal when they're born, they have a higher propensity to fail even, you know, get higher, let's put it this way, with
Mm.
a drug. Okay, because most drugs release dopamine. So I'm trying to say that dopamine is such an important molecule. Now, it's one other important thing. It's also involved in cognition. Think about it. So if your dopamine is low, you can't remember properly. Your memory is not working. Your working memory isn't working. So that not only does it keep you in a state of being, I use the word quotes, happy or well-being or whatever, you're also involved in important stuff like working memory. So
So,
that's
but
important. Huh?
just to interrupt you, just to clarify a little bit there, what is actually classified as low dopamine? Is
Okay.
that relative to your own dopamine receptors,
Well, that's
or is that
that.
an actual given amount that we know to be higher or lower
Yeah. Well,
for a set of people?
let's put it this way: there are ranges, and I'm not. It doesn't matter what the range is, okay? But there are ranges where dopamine is considered in the normal amount. And by the way, it was a very good question because a lot of clinicians think that you could use a test, a plasma test, to just measure dopamine with a spectral photometer, okay? And that is not correct. You know why? Because in the
Why?
periphery, you got dopamine that affects the dopamine dumping into the plasma. In the brain, you got dopamine, but that goes through the cerebrospinal fluid, which may then dump into the plasma. Now I ask the question, how do you know which is coming from the plasma and how much is coming from the brain? And when you
Is
do a
it possible?
dopamine test, they look at sometimes even metabolites, and you can argue this metabolites come from the brain, this was coming from periphery, and that is not very perfect. So the point in the matter is that it's very difficult to measure dopamine levels. Okay. And even only way you could do it is the cerebrospinal fluid. And believe me, people don't want to go and do needles in the cerebrospinal fluid. I don't think you would like that,
Mm,
would you?
I don't think so. No.
Neither would I. So that doesn't work very well. Okay. So that means that it's not easy to measure the dopamine levels. Okay. Unless you're really going in and doing cerebrospinal fluid. And clinicians don't quite understand that. They think they can take a measure of plasma and really understand what's going on, and they really can't. Okay. So, but just between you and me, whatever that level of normal is, okay, this is what happens. I'll tell you what happens. When there is a negative emotion, okay, that tends to prevent the release or let's put it this way, the function of dopamine. Then maybe it's better to say the function. Dopamine function goes down when there is a negative emotion. This positive dopamine activity is is expressed at a good level. Okay. So one thing is the DNA, okay? And the other thing is the environment. And I'm going to give you a lesson of something that you might have heard of called epigenetics. And epigenetics
Mm.
is the environmental impact onto the expression of a protein that is coded by the DNA through the RNA. Is that okay? And
Yes. Yes.
and there is a formula, Bailey. The phenotype, any phenotype or anything that you want to consider to be color of the eyes, but it also could be your behavior, okay? It's equal to your genes, which is the DNA, right? Plus your environment, which is your epigenetics, okay? Now, why is that
Okay.
important? Why is that important? Well, it's important because when you're born, you are born with the DNA that comes from your mother or father, good or bad. That's what you got, okay? When you go through life, the expression of the DNA, even if it's a perfect, you know, a perfect DNA that's coding for your dopaminergic system, let's say, okay, which is affecting, many neurotransmitters. But let's just say take the DRD2 gene, the dopamine D2 receptor gene, which is very, very important. Okay. Now, if you're born with the normal complement of the DRD2 gene, it's called DRD2A2. That's the variant. That's normal. If you're born with the DRD2A1, our lab found that you have a 40% reduction of the D2 receptors in your brain that you need. So if you're born with DNA, where you, for example, DRD2 gene, is compromised, it's not the right form. Think about it. Your ability to have the normal amount of dopamine is not there because you don't have any receptor. You don't have the D2 receptors for interact with.
So when you don't have these D2 receptors
Yeah.
as many due to your own genetics,
Right.
does that mean that the dopamine that you do receive from external influences such as alcohol or drugs, does that overwhelm the system more so relatively to how many D2 receptors you have?
Well,
Is that
well,
am I right in saying that?
yeah. Well, that's a good question. Okay. So there's two ways to look at it. When you just use alcohol acutely, you know what I mean? By acute, you just drink a lemon, bang, you get dopamine release. Okay. And if you got D2 receptors, whereby, say it's normal, you get the normal response on the alcohol, right? However, if you chronically use alcohol constantly, okay, guess what happens? The D2 receptors go down. So if you are born
Is
with the
that just
DNA,
alcohol or any
huh?
is that just alcohol or any
No,
high
you get that with
dopamine?
cocaine. You get that with opioids. You get that with psychostimulants. You get that with chronic stress. Okay. In other words, uh, there's many ways to knock down the dopamine system. Okay, especially if you use something chronic, including sugar. Okay,
Mm.
so all of that, okay, can affect your integrity of the dopaminergic D2 system. But remember, there's other systems, other type of dopamines, D1. There's from D1 to D9. So there's a lot of systems that are just the receptors for dopamine. But let's focus even on the D2 for a moment. And when you use chronic alcohol, chronic opioids, chronic psychostimulants, chronic cocaine, chronic eating, sugar, whatever, you're getting D2 receptor down regulation. Now, think about that. If you're born with the DNA that says you don't have the right amount of D2 receptors, you know what it is? It's sort of like an itch. You're sort of like, Jesus, there's something wrong. I gotta do
Mm.
that. You don't even think about it. When you take alcohol the first time, oh my God, I feel great. This is what I should do all the time. Or I take a little cocaine, whatever. I feel terrific. It's called it's pseudonism, okay? Because it's not real in a sense, okay? But you're feeling good because the thing that you're missing, you're getting from because you're getting a little extra boost from the alcohol to cause a little extra dopamine than the norm. But it's sort of like the tail wagging the dog. Wagging the dog. You can never get to where you want to get
Mm.
because you think that the alcohol or drugs made you feel good, but you can't ever get to really the place that you
Yeah.
want to get.
That
Does that
that
make
that
sense?
marries and yes, of course, that marries well with what I currently feel like I understand about the system where evolutionarily it makes sense. Even going back to when we were much smaller organisms, way before we were humans,
Right.
we would move towards light for photosynthesis and we'd move away from potential harms from ourselves. And it's also bears in mind the fact that when we from what I've heard more and more, which is where the confusion lies, I feel, of a lot of people and myself, is that dopamine is in anticipation of a reward, not the reward itself.
Well, that's right. And the point is that we have to consider the fact that there is what we call environmental influence on to the expression of the DNA coding for all these neurotransmitters in the brain, including dopamine. Okay. And I'm going to give the audience and you a little bit of a lesson on what epigenetics is, if you let me do that. Is that
Of
okay?
course, please do. Yes.
Okay. So, years ago in the 70s, we had no idea how the environment interacted with our DNA or RNA or any of that. We knew nothing. And just about 20 years ago, okay, in Canada, a guy Meany came up with the idea and was able to show, okay, that the environment absolutely has neurochemical mechanisms and chemical mechanisms that can affect the expression of the coded RNA protein. Okay? And this is,
Undercoded.
I'm going to give it to you real simple. So
Okay.
on our basic DNA, there's a chromosome. It's a chromosome. And sitting up for the chromosome are these sugar molecules called histones. Okay? Now, when there's positive emotion or good stuff going on in your brain, and you feel happy and good and everything's great, you know what happens? There's an increase in acetylation of the histones, which increases the expression of whatever gene that histone is linked to, so that you may get an increased expression of what you really want and need. Okay? If there's a negative emotion, you don't get acetylation. You get methylation. You get methylation. You stop the expression of the normal amount of expression, not so much on the DNA. Don't affect the DNA. It affects the expression of the RNA that transcribed, the protein, and you got a reduction of protein. Okay, so when you got negative emotion, okay, you're getting a reduction of genes that you need to make you feel good. So stop a minute and think about that. No matter what your DNA is, whatever the transcription is for that protein, high, low, whatever, is affected by your environment. So now, when we give you the formula that the phenotype, name it whatever you want, eating, sex, drinking, whatever you want, hunger, whatever you want, that is affected by your DNA, that's called the gene, plus the epigenetic. And the epigenetics is the environment. And the environment could be up or down, depending whether it's positive or negative emotionally, let's say, to an individual. So that's very, very important. So does that make sense?
So, yes, that does make sense. My question is, does that work? Because one thing that fascinates me, especially within natural selection and the genome and evolution, is
Yeah.
the exponentiality of that effect
Okay.
throughout a lifetime and potentially multiple lifetimes, obviously within line with the germline. So does that work such as a snowball effect
Say
with
that
negative
again.
and
Say that.
does that work as does that work as a snowball effect with negative and positive emotions within the
Now
genome?
explain snowball so I understand it.
So does that work exponentially over a long time horizon where once that first domino has fallen?
Well,
In that,
Put it this way.
does that tend to increase and increase
Yeah.
on larger scales
Yeah.
as time goes by, or is there a way to potentially halt that and reverse that to more of a normal level?
Yeah. That's a very, very good question. We know that when we look back in time, okay, the question was this. This is going to help explain it, okay? Here's the question. The DRD2 gene, for example, I hope you don't want to go to that one because I just explained it, okay?
Oh, please, please.
The DRD2 gene has been around, of course, for umpteens of time, okay? You know, but the form of the DRD2 gene varied over time, okay? So if you go back, millions of years, okay, or whatever, what was the DNA look like, in a cell or if you want to go to Neanderthals a little bit closer to us, what does it look like? And there is there is evidence and thought, okay, that the DRD2 A2 allele, okay, which is the normal complement of the DRD2 receptors, okay, and the production thereof, okay, years ago, there might have been the DRD2A1 allele because the A1 allele is a less D2 receptors, but it gives the individual a benefit. And the benefit is hunter gathering. I'm not going to be a
Mm,
nobleman and give away my food to anybody that wants it. Yeah. And also, the other problem is grabbing a female and that female is yours and crazy stuff, okay? Like that. But the DRD2A1 years ago was the major form of the dopamine D2 system because you needed it for survival. Now, what has happened over the years and years and years and years in the human being is, guess what? There was a shift. And it's sort of, I think one way to explain it is like this. And it's a little kind of a weird idea. But take a look at the female population, a nurturing population, okay? But men, yeah, I'm talking about Neanderthals, they didn't look at females. And by the way, in certain countries, even more recently, don't look at females the right way, right? And they just abuse
mm,
them. Now, what happens if there was a female out there that said, no, no, you can't touch me. Who the hell are you? Right? Well,
mm.
that might have been a female that had the DRD2 A2.
So you're saying this. So you're saying that in a smaller society, sort of in tribal times, or even if
Yeah,
you look at
right.
towards primates who live in these kind of cultures,
Right.
that that's A1 type, that DRD2A1 being the more prevalent for
Donovan.
addiction,
Yeah. Yeah.
and wanting those sort of short term pleasures was a lot more sought after because of the needs of the day,
Right.
versus in today's highly integrated society and social standings amongst that, the more withheld DRD2A2 gene is one that is more sought after and prevalent and
Well,
is
it's more prevalent.
given it as a sign. It's like type A versus type B people in a sense.
Say it again?
Have you Have you heard about type A versus is it type A versus type 2 people? Have you
Yeah.
heard of that before?
Well, it is interesting because ju- just to break it down a little bit. So the A2, okay, is now considered the most prevalent form of the DRD2 gene. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. And the fact that it's more prevalent is protective against certain things that in this society, in the current society, we don't believe is the very nice way to go. Okay?
Yeah. Well, it makes sense in terms of how we've developed as a society, with, let's say, agriculture being, I can see tying in quite heavily. Whereas with agriculture, it makes sense to not just go for what you want when you want it. You want to withhold and withdraw yourself
Right.
so that you can have more in the future and think more long term, as opposed to, I want this now, I'm going to have this now.
Yeah. Well, you see, the reason why I brought that up is because you asked me about shifting in terms of the gene over time. Okay. Okay. It turns out now David Cummings, a geneticist, a friend of mine, wrote a book, and the book pointed out that as we are moving into newer centuries or newer decades, let's put it that way, the A1 allele is actually increasing in the population over the A2. And eventually there may be a shift to where the A1 becomes more prominent than the A2. Maybe, I don't know how many years from now. I actually had, what was it? Every 25 years is increasing a certain small percentage. So
Do you-
we might be going into a situation where the human being is going backwards in terms of its basic tenet of how they act on Earth. And you can see a little bit of that what's going on in the world today. Because
Mm,
think about all the countries that there's 57, for example, dictatorships, okay, and all the crazy stuff that's going on. By the way, even in America, okay, now, okay, I'm not going to mention any names, but the thing is that we are looking more, in many cases, like Neanderthals and humans. And
mm.
that is a problem.
Well, that often seems so. With what you've said and the timeline of when these discoveries came into play, it seems not only that it's more of the case where, especially with alcoholism and any high dopamine related activity or drug is
Right.
concerned, especially with opioids and narcotics
Yes.
amongst them.
Yes.
It seems that there's a lot of people who are encouraged to use that for their own benefit and gain,
What?
whereas people in different who make decisions can profit from that, and it keeps people in those that, like a big one today being social media. Social media's addictive qualities integrated is as a feature of those programs bombard young brains, young minds from a very young age with this high intense colors, sounds, to fire off those dopamine receptors in their head to effectively fry them. And it's no coincidence, seems from what you're saying now, there's no coincidence that that in its own right coincided with the increased anxiety levels that are seen across the world, and also our increased tendency to riot and fight and argue in a Neanderthal kind of way, like you just mentioned. And it seems a lot of these things come from either whether I'd like to think it was incidental and just plain ignorance, but one way or another from the ease and availability of different drugs and platforms which increase our dopamine levels dramatically has led us to a society which is very hot-headed and short attention span and very anxious and depressed on the whole. And I don't know how we are likely to be able to come out of that.
Good question. And it's true. Um, okay. So a couple of things I want to address. One is that when you look at video games and you look at the kids that are doing video games and adults that are doing video games, the gamers have learned to actually explore the possibility to keep you intensely, addictively involved by altering stuff that would change your dopaminergic response. Okay. So social media and gaming, okay, is very powerful in affecting the basic integrity of the mind of young people, or even up to adults. So so that's one thing. Okay, one thing they've learned. The people that want to make the money have learned how to tap in to that dopaminergic system. Okay, and and they talk about it in meetings. Okay, so it's nothing surprising. So they got you. They got you. Okay,
It's intentional. Yeah.
yeah. So that's one thing. Okay. Secondly, the the idea of social media in general, okay, and the idea of, you know, with when I grew up, okay, maybe I did. When I grew up, I had no internet. I didn't even have TV when I was growing up. Okay, father had TV. We had a radio. Okay, you you never get you can't get much on the radio, really. You couldn't see anything. If you went to the movies, I was alive when there was I was a kid though, when it was World War II. But I remember going to the movies. My family went to the movies, and I went at an early age, and I used to see this on TV, not TV, on the big screen, what was going on in the war. But we never brought it into our home. You know what I'm saying? Now, with one flick onto your phone, you, you could go whatever you want. It's completely changed. The world has completely changed that way. And therefore, because of that, when anyone wants to manipulate anyone else, they they have free range. They could do it. And social media is out there that could do it. X, whatever Musk is calling his X or whatever. But they have a license to shape the mind of people, young and old, just by what they put on their platform. And therefore, your vulnerability is subject to what you are exposing yourself to through social media. And
Mm.
as I said, when you sit there, for example, and I'm not getting into politics, but if I'm watching, say, Fox News, which I don't very much, and I hear there's a lie, my brain's going, "What?" My dopamine is flying out of my head and saying, "Oh my."
Yeah.
Or if I'm watching MSNBC and I hear something and I say, "Oh my, oh gee, that's terrible," or whatever. And I'm not
Mm.
trying to get into politics, but you are being exposed, which is affecting your brain constantly. Okay. And the stress level, as you said, here in the world is increased exponentially over the years when I was born, which was 39, by the way, than today. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does, and it's a shame how that's kind of come about. Whereas, as human intelligence about these matters and about these areas of science and neurobiology have come to expand, that has led to an exploitation in those very features which beforehand we had no grasp of.
That's right.
So, whereas we're all quite happy to frolic in the daisies and go on dog walks and be within nature, now that's nothing. That is a grain of sugar versus a bump of cocaine in today's world. It's it cannot compare to the hit that the brain the brain gets now. And the most sickening thing, the way that I see it, is that they're allowed to use this and do this to people who are under the age of 18 or under the age of say 25, 26, 27,
Right.
because of how detrimental it is to their brain in the first place. And they know it is. With the science has proven that different drugs, different chemicals, different, especially social media, with that being the first ever, really, it's the first ever man-made visual drug, which doesn't have to be consumed orally or intravenously or whatever it might be. We're now able to do this and promoting and directing and targeting it towards children, towards children who are the most at risk of this affecting their lives and making them more depressed and more anxious. From the science that you helped to pioneer of understanding how when your dopamine, the dopamine, sorry, when your dopaminergic system is altered, it will increase anxiety, that anxiousness within those receptors. That's the part that really I'm a big proponent in believing that social media as it is should not be legal until you are 18 years old. At least 18.
No,
Personally, I don't think it. Yes, watch stuff, but especially being able to post stuff. You shouldn't be able to post stuff under age of 18. But it's what's really frustrating to see is the fact that it's younger people who move the needle the most because they've got the most energy and desire to do so, and their systems. Oh, they didn't. I didn't know, and they didn't know slash don't know, and a lot of them aren't as inclined as I am to find out for themselves. So where I can't see where that's going to lead us in terms of the next generation and the next generation, because it's like you say about what in to quote your words earlier on in our conversation, the future is now. Being this ball is rolling, and it's only going to go further and further down that line until some sort of major intervention.
well, Bailey, you're speaking to the choir, okay? So, Bailey, you're 100% right. I was sitting in the movies the other night. I think it was last night. I'm sitting with my girlfriend. We're the only one in the movies because we go late. We go to the late movies. There's no one there except us, basically. And I'm watching this kid's film. I'm looking at it. It's violent, total violence, violence. Why would you want to show young children the importance of violence in their life? This is exactly the same thing as what social media is doing, what the gaming is doing. Why? What is it that does that? It's money, because they know that the human is driven not just by love, but also driven by violence because we're animals. Okay. And you just stop a minute and say, well, that's a crazy statement. No, it isn't. Because that's what our brain is all about. No,
That
we
was
have to
survival for the
control.
vast majority.
Huh? Say it again.
For the vast majority of human nature and humans' evolution,
Is violence.
even since was violence. That was the biggest thing in our survival is can you defend yourself?
Exactly. And knowing the genetics. Now listen to this. In the David Cummings understanding, uh, you know, uh, what happens is this: the reason why there's going to be an increase, why I said there's an increase over time, from going from the A2 to the A1 or shifting to the A1, is think about this. Today, you got people that have the DRD2 A1 allele. A lot of the teenagers are fed up with their parents. They think they know it all. And they leave at early ages. They get children at early ages, and they propagate the A1 allele. So, and it's not just a small number, it's increasing. So what we're saying is that by understanding human nature, understanding the fact that we're a little bit better off than the apes, and I wrote a paper about that. I'll send it to you. We're a little bit
Please
better
do.
off than the apes, a little bit. That you're preaching to young animals, and the animals are taking it in, and they're growing up with the idea: if I want something, I'm going to take it. I don't care if it kills somebody, murder somebody, hurt somebody, because they see in the movies, in books, and stuff that they read all over the place. And they get the idea that it's okay if I'm a bully, because I'm going to get what I want no matter what. And there is an increase in bullyism because
This seems,
that's what they want.
yeah,
God.
this seems to be like that's something that's seen almost akin to Lord of the Flies, where Lord of the Flies, the book.
Yeah, 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 of course.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Uh, it seems akin to Lord of the Flies when at that younger age, and I feel that may come down to the fact that they haven't had such a long time horizon to assess the results of their own experiments in life.
Right.
That short-term actions get short-term results. But it seems to be as people do get older and wiser and they can see the more further outreach of their actions and implications of what they do within the world, that a more harmonious way is akin to more of a peaceful life and mutual beneficial results. But at the same time,
Yeah.
it's to me, it's comes a lot down to that question, which I've been asking quite a lot recently, being that how much do we have control over? Because if we have these, obviously, we do have these systems, these genetic systems, which vary in different ways from the genome depending on our own existence epigenetically. How much of that can we dictate ourselves versus how much of that is then set on its course from where you are? Obviously, that nature versus nurture. I'm in line with believing that essentially they are both the same thing, but it does need a directed intentionality from the person in order to take it in that way. Because that's what I wanted to ask. Because I know a lot of your research and work is rightfully so, I believe, revolved around addiction and helping cure addictions and helping people get onto the right path, whether that be through different programs and explaining the 12-step programs neurobiologically as well. But I wanted to know, is there a way to use those systems that are ingrained in us, that we are built from and manifest out of, to choose what we want to do and use them to our own benefit?
Okay. Let me go back just a little bit. Okay. Because you said something.
I say a lot of things.
There was something, because you said something that I want to talk about. There's something called now or later. Okay. So we know when people have what we call a pre-addiction based on the DNA indices, which is primarily a dysregulation of neurotransmitter activity or even the dopaminergic function. When you have a reduced, like we call it a hypodopaminergia, a low dopamine function, okay? There's a bluntness in the brain, okay? Your brain is not up to par. You're not focusing right. You're not thinking right. You've got stress, you got anxiety, you got depression, you got all this going on, okay? That the now or later is very important because those people that are set up, like you said, set up with a dysfunctional proper DNA to make them work quotes
In today's world,
normal is not there. Okay. And they rather choose what's happening now than to look at the repercussions of that now for later, and who is going to affect, and who is going to hurt, and what does it mean, and what's going to happen, what's going to come back to you later. And when they're asked, do you want to get a reward now or later? They say, now, give it to me. Give it to me. I want it. I want it now. I don't care about later. That is the crust of where we are in those people that I call have tea addiction. Okay? Okay. Now, to go to you to go to your question is, can we use what we have for our benefit in some way? Okay? Meaning we're talking about what we have. What do we have? Okay? That's the question. What do we have that we can rely on that's going to allow us to go forward in this life in a positive way? Isn't that the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Either whether you are A2 or you are A1.
Exactly. Well, even without the A2 and A1, but just the whole concept of what could we do, okay, to bring about, no matter what our DNA is, okay, to bring about an epigenetic effect onto whatever our DNA is, okay? In a sense, can we reduce methylation of genes that we really, really want to be expressed versus acetylation, get more acetylation of the genes that we really want, including D2, serotonergic genes, GABA, whatever genes, okay? And the question is, how do we do that? How do we bring about the utilization of the positive kind of good expression of the genes that we really need to make us feel good or bring about well-being? That's sort of your question. Or reduce stress, okay? Because as you said, and I agree 100%, we are living in a very, very stressful world right now. It is not normal. From what I'm older than you, and from what I saw when I was young compared to now, it's like, oh my God. And the stuff that people are getting away with in government now, compared to what they got away with in government years ago, is day and night, day and night. It's ridiculous. Okay. So the fact that as a young person, you see that is very important. But how do you tap into the good compared to, just keeping going along with the bad? How do you,
Not
huh?
not necessarily tapping into the good
Yeah.
and the feel good, but more so in terms of tapping into and sticking with and being consistent with the useful,
Okay.
the drive,
Well,
the what's
good. I'm
helpful
agree.
towards
Useful.
us, the
That's right. Yeah. The, u-
yeah.
the useful. Well, the only way, think about this, the DNA, you can't change. Yes. You're stuck with that. That's your DNA. That's how you were born. That's what you got. That's the cards you were dealt. Forget about it. Okay? That's what you got, baby. But the good news is that there is environment and there is the idea of epigenetics, right? And what could you do to increase the so-called environmental impact onto your DNA, which is really not your DNA, but onto the expression of your RNA, okay? Well, let's just take the idea of health, okay? Now, certainly you could say exercise is very important, okay? It can help you. Eating the good food is real important. And by the way, someone just came up with something that said the most healthy food you could eat is a ribeye steak because the little
Much
fat
agreed.
is going to
Yes.
help your brain think. Okay. So, your eating, okay, is something that you can alter and use that could be helpful to you because that is affecting the epigenetic expression of whatever you have. Okay. So I could go on. I just wrote a paper about religion. I wrote a paper about spirituality. Okay. The idea of spirituality for some people is very important and it's very positive and it's something that could help the brain express itself in a good way, well, good way, a way that makes you feel better. Okay. And that's used in recovery for addiction or just mental health. Okay. What I'm driving at is that they're saying lifestyle changes that could be important to help you and give you some benefit and give you something useful that you could really work on to do better. The only problem is that you're stuck with your DNA. And it's very, when I say this, I don't mean to be negative, but I mean to be realistic. And you got to understand that it is somewhat difficult to overcome your DNA. I'll give you an example. There's you're born, for example, with a gene, it's called the FTO gene, that increases fat production. But they found that if you really, really alter your fat intake, you may reduce the fat that you have in your body. Now, you may be able to do that, okay? And there's other examples. So the environment, you can overcome the expression of the DNA to through the RNA interaction, say epigenetically or environmentally. That's great, and that's what you're trying to do. The question is, with people, if they don't get immediate results, especially those that need these immediate results because of their DNA, right?
Mm.
They go away. They don't stick to it. They don't, this is too hard. I'm not getting anywhere. You know, when I was a kid, I wanted to become a muscle builder. I get the chicks and get the girls, and oh my God, this is, and I tried and tried and tried, but my body just didn't allow me to become that way. Probably with the DNA. Now, you have to start with something, and that's your DNA. Now you can
Mm.
overcome it, but you have to really stick with it. And not a lot of people are willing to do that. Is Bailey, that's the thing. So something that is useful. Question is, how do you get someone to stick with it, especially if the DNA is saying you're never gonna get there, maybe. I know that's
Well, that
negative
was
thinking, but you
well. It's
you tell me about
it's.
that.
I don't think it's negative. I think you're right in what you're saying, and then to some degree, that hyper realization is crucial in order to find out where you are and where you can go from here.
Yeah.
You can't get anywhere else other than from here. And that was something for me. I'm looking towards what I'm finding a lot of benefit and joy in doing at the moment is leaning in towards those things that I feel that I am good at and away from the things that I feel that I am bad at, even if the things that I am bad at I could do with working on personally. And I say that because and one of the reasons I reached out to yourself as well is that I've had a lot of addiction in my family.
Yes.
Uh, Alcoholism on um, both sides, maybe my mother's and my father's side. And that's something I look at. And now coming into my mid to late 20s, I can see if I were to not be conscious of it, I can see those things
Creep
picking up
up.
within myself.
They can creep up.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, if I went out and had a couple beers and a few too many beers, I can see I will keep going.
Yeah.
I can and I can see that and feel that within me, and then I can also feel that within different activities and actions that aren't drug related. Whereas some things like exercise, I am addicted to, possibly because of the endorphins I get from that. But there's other things where if because of that feedback loop, that if I do not get some kind of immediate reinforcement or feedback, I aren't able to stick to for too long.
Well, I mean, that's very important. I'm glad you shared that with me. Okay. So it's good that you are aware of the fact that there was a family history of addictive behavior. Okay. And you're aware of the fact that it could affect you personally. And you know that. Okay. So you try to deal with it. And by the way, the endorphins, it's not that the endorphins is fairly dopamine, because the endorphins inhibits the GABA, which allows the glutamate and the beta to release dopamine. So years ago, they just thought it was the endorphins, but it's really just the dopamine. Okay, just to clarify that's just science. But the the thing is that not just you, but so many other people, and I've done with Dr. Peter Thanos at the University of Buffalo. We've done a lot of work on exercise. I'll send you some of the papers and
Please do.
and a lot of the about D2, by the way, and all of that. And exercise definitely has positive influence in let's say uh, it's not going to stop the DNA, but it's going to work on the RNA to keep you probably in a better frame of mind, and maybe keep you away from the alcohol and drugs and stuff like that, which is important. Okay. Also, your brain is telling you, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, because you know what's going to happen. If you do it and you're young and you want to have a good life, and you've seen stuff in your family that didn't make you very happy, okay? And you want to stay away from that. And you know that. And, and that's also helping you, okay? The knowledge. But you have to be careful, because under great stress, okay, you can go backwards and you can get into the addictive problem of drugs and alcohol and stuff like that. And not just you, but anybody, okay, that has that DNA basis. Now, if you look at my work, one of the things that we've developed is the genetic addiction risk severity test. Oh, gosh. Do you know about that? Have you
Not
seen that?
particularly, no.
Huh?
I haven't, no.
Oh, okay.
I haven't, no. I can search it up. What was it called, sorry?
It's called GARS, GARS, Genetic Addiction Risk Severity Test. Severity or score, but we got it. My severity.
Ghost.
So it's a genetic test. Would you like to hear about it?
Please, yes.
Yeah, it's a genetic test that I developed in 2014. Okay, which has now been out there for those many years. There's probably about over 100 papers on it, different uh, uh, clinical trials, stuff like that, and it's a panel of 10 genes, okay, that go across the brain reward cascade system, okay, and it all links to, of course, the dopaminergic system at the end, and we've had a lot of good results in assessing whether or not you have a propensity for pre-addiction, whether or not have increased cravings, a whole bunch of stuff that we were talking about. That test is a very
Mm.
good test to determine, basically,
I'll have a look into it.
huh?
I'll look into it I'll
Yeah.
look into it for myself and do the test
For,
myself.
for example, when I had that commercially available, now I'm reworking it now because of COVID, but now I'm reworking it, trying to get it back out. But for example, with a swab of the cheek,
Mm.
we could tell you, number one, what genes in your brain are deficient right across the brain reward circuitry. We could tell you whether you have a tendency for low dopaminergia or hyperdopaminergia. We could determine your trait. not your state, but your DNA trait, which can give us an understanding of your risk for all of these addictive
Mm.
behaviors that you got from the DNA from your family. And we have done, for example, children, okay, that came from families of alcoholics and 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 also, let's say, teenagers. And we we have, for example, shown that when an individual, like say 18-year-old, 19-year-old, when they realize that their family, not just because they're telling them that their father was an alcoholic or their mother was an eating disorder addict, they can see the result and they stop smoking. Okay?
Mm.
So this is an extremely important test that we could determine your addictive behavior and future addictive behavior at birth. Okay? Now, to step forward in today, okay, we have just found out, we have done what we call, it's called in deep silica GWise meta analyses and pharmacogenomic analyses. And why? Listen to this. This is important. Just I haven't published this yet, which I'm sending to Nature Genetics. Okay. Now, while there may be all these genes and everything, and we could measure 10 genes and 11 variants, let's say. Guess what? After looking at, almost 70 million people, what we found using the gauze, and this is all done by big data banks and AI, by the way. Okay? Guess what? We found, we found that 5 of those genes, the dopamine D2, the dopamine D4, which is one of your oldest dopamine receptors that increases your ability for novelty seeking, okay? The opioid mu receptor, okay? An enzyme called catechol-methyltransferase, which destroys the dopamine in the synapse, so it keeps the dopamine balanced correctly, okay?
Mm.
And the 5-HTTLP, the serotonin transporter, which deals with serotonin integrity, can predict at the level. And I don't know if you know everything about significance. Remember 0.05, right? For significant
Mm.
levels, at the level of 10 to the minus 16, 10 to the minus 17. 0.0000. Very highly significant. And guess what it predicts?
What?
Not just addiction. It predicts all mental illness.
Wow.
So we have a test of only
What?
5 genes out of God knows how many genes that could give you evidence for what you're looking at in the future, but a very affordable test, only 5 genes that could tell us, tell your parents, tell anyone, tell when you get married, tell your children, this is what you have, and you got to be careful. Or
So would that
can we
say
do something with understanding that, can we balance it and make your life better? That's the next question.
so will that test give you your propensity towards mental illness
Yeah.
or addiction on the whole, or is it
Mental
each
illness has,
type?
without addiction,
Is it more specific?
just mental illness. And we call all mental illness, if you know my work, we call it reward deficiency
Syndrome,
syndrome.
yes.
And if
RDS.
you got it, and if you look at the DSM-5 as an example, do you think the brain is carved out with what cold air and and whatever personalities of that? The brain is not carved out the way the DSM-5 is. That's that's a symptomatology. about the brain is, but it has nothing to do with how the brain's covered. Bipolar, what is bipolar depression? And what is major depression? Okay? Come on. It isn't.
See, my my idea behind why these things are different mental illnesses are the way that they are, do I believe stem from the world as it is today. Whereas, because the way I tend to look at things and try to look at things is that everything that there's occurs with us within ourselves has a benefit evolutionarily. Somewhere down the line, there was a benefit to that.
Exactly.
However, now that we are in such a hypersocial world where almost every social element within the whole country is connected, which has never been done before, and then we can see different things online and hearing things that don't affect our immediate surroundings. I believe those are what have given rise to different areas in the brain which cause these mental illnesses. If you look back throughout history, people who had different types of serious psychological mental illnesses were sometimes regarded as shaman within the tribe.
Mystical. Yeah, mystical idea. The whole idea of hallucinations.
Yeah, and it's those people had their purpose within different, very specific tribal settings in small
I
society.
got you.
But now those things, and it's amazing that we can now test for that propensity towards these things
Right.
through your propensity towards RDS
What?
and how that affects. Because the one thing, so this is one thing that's always stuck with me personally, is that I was never tested, but I was probably quite likely when I was younger to have ADHD.
I'm I'm not
But
surprised.
I was never tested.
Yeah.
But my reasons my parents told me, when I got older, that they didn't test me or have me tested was because they didn't want a
A
label
label on you. Well,
hanging over my head, which would then allow me to restrict myself for what I believe I could do.
exactly. Exactly.
Which is my similar argument towards people with minor mental health issues or RDS, where obviously when you take it to a serious level, yes, help,
Oh,
integration,
yeah.
medication is important. But on a minor level, where you see so many people who are diagnosed with things which is really just a symptom of being human,
Well,
I don't know where you fall on that.
I hear you there. But when we're talking about reward deficiency syndrome, you really got it. Now you could have maybe a lower level, and you could take, for example, we could take the 10-panel gene test that I had cars, and you could try, economize it and say low, medium, high, okay, based on the number of alleles that you have. But even at the lowest
Mm.
allele, I'm not sure how minor it is, okay? And what I'm trying to say is that I understand the idea of non-labeling, okay? I understand that, especially for young children, and I can understand why your parents were concerned about that, okay? I look at it another way. I look at it, the earlier we could figure out someone's problem now, that maybe we could go ahead and just don't ignore it, maybe do something about it. And what I mean is this, and you haven't asked that question yet, but I'm going to go ahead of you, okay? Because it has to
Please.
do with RDS. So the assumption being that when you have RDS, you have an imbalance of the dopaminergic system. Has to do with the neurotransmitters, of course, affecting the proper dopamine release at the nucleus accumbens, okay? And if you have RDS, whether you have a couple of alleles or 7 or more, we say that if you have 4 alleles, you're inclined to use drugs. If you have 7 alleles, you're inclined to use alcoholism, okay? Alcohol, not alcoholism. All right. So when you look at that, how could you do something about it? How could you balance it environmentally, epigenetically, so that you may be able to overcome? some of this DNA problem. Okay? And that is what we call induction of dopamine homeostasis,
Mm.
dopamine balance. Now, we've developed since the middle 70s a complex called KB220. Have you read about that?
I haven't, no.
Ah,
I heard you talk a little bit about it previously
yeah, yeah,
on, different talks,
yeah.
but I haven't not too much, no.
I'll send you papers on it. But we have a lot of evidence that we've developed a complex that could balance the dopamine in the brain. We actually have functional magnetic resonance imaging pictures in humans, and not animals, by the way, but in humans, where we could bring down the high dopamine and we could bring up the bad dopamine. I mean, the low dopamine, not the bad dopamine, the low dopamine, and we have balance. There is, and I'm not going to say this, I'm saying this in all due respect to all my colleagues all around the world and all the great science and all the great guys and girls and, and people that are trying to do the right thing to solve the problem of mental health or mental illness, not health, but mental illness. KB220, there's right now 36 studies, 33 of them in humans, clinical trials, 3 in animals, that can actually bring about the balance of dopamine in the brain if you're even born with the DNA suspect, okay, of mental illness or addiction. So that not only can we diagnose at an early age with the 5Gs now, we can also provide a potential solution, which is basically amino acids and some herbs that are not going to kill you, that has been tested. Millions and millions of people have used it, and there's no side effects. And instead of doing what the pharmaceutical company is doing, Bailey, by blocking the dopamine, the Ceridol and all this other stuff, blocking dopamine, we balance it. We make it whole, no matter what your DNA is. So that is the future of how an individual like you that may have the genetic problem of this addictiveness may be able, and you're doing it, by the way, with exercise. But when you take your exercise, you add this, now you got something that is really maybe helping you. And we're just I'm building my newest product. I'm not here to sell anything, but my newest product, we call it SNAP, SYNAP, which is the complex that brings and induces dopamine homeostasis, balancing the brain. Don't take away what you need, because the pharmaceutical industry know one thing: block dopamine, get
Mm.
extinction. That's the wrong
This
way to go. That's
See, this
the
is
opposite. Think about that. That's the opposite. So when we talk about, in the case of you, when your parents didn't want to label you, if we had an ability to test you early on, not to label you, but to give you information that could help you along your journey and give you something that is safe and effective that could balance your brain, wouldn't that be a good thing?
See, I'm torn. I'm
Okay,
torn. I truly am torn.
good.
I'll explain why, and that's because I do believe having that information for those use cases is great. It's great to have the information, and I also believe at the same time that if my genetics are built towards a certain dynamic,
Yeah.
that means there are also other genes
Yeah.
which are also in tandem with these, which would then be, as a cascade effect, would then be out of balance because of the dopamine
Yeah.
change. So that could have an effect somewhere else, which we have not quite studied yet, and that could have different unknown effects that we would not know and have not been tested for. That coming under the situation of, right, I am built the way I am, the person next to me is built the way they are. Try your best to learn intentionally to deal with how you are the best you can. But I also understand at the same point exactly why there's that a lot of people don't have that ability, or in different situations have no inclination to do so, and they are at a lot higher risk of just falling into one of the pitfalls of life and maybe becoming an alcoholic or an opioid addict or along those lines.
Oh,
And then further than that, at taking this outside of the realm of just me or individuals, from from what history tells us of how governments and big pharma and anyone who has the ability to help is likely to ignore the ability to help in order to make profit. Can you see a world where they are incentivized to promote and fund this research and these drugs and these tests in order for the world's benefit, when that means they're going to take away one of their biggest foundations of making money? Social media and media as it is at the moment, drugs how they work at the moment, are a massive, massive, massive industry, which this research you're telling me is groundbreaking and as amazing as it is, and would be amazing if it was in place. Cannot see a reason logistically. Obviously, on a humanitarian level, yes, 100%. This is a massive, massive benefit and has incredible implications for the human race and humans just day to
right.
day life. But implementing that
Okay.
would come at such a huge cost to those who make those decisions. I cannot see that.
Okay. Well, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, no, I think I got it. Okay.
And I've just
No,
thrown
no, no,
three
no.
different things at you there.
No, I
So
hear that. Now, let's take it one step at a time, 'cause you said a lot. Uh,
yeah,
okay. What we are saying, okay, number one, the pharmaceutical industry is doing it all wrong. Okay.
yes,
Number two,
agreed.
mm, we are saying you got to bring about balance of the neurochemicals in the brain. It doesn't only balance the brain. You got to balance the whole brain reward cascade that we know of, that we believe the 7 or 8 of neurotransmitter systems, even though there's many more, many second messages. But in the reductionist point of view, we want to balance that. Okay. And 3, we're saying if we had something that is not blocking the physiological status of the brain in terms of neurochemical interaction and dopamine integrity, then that's a good thing. Number 4, if you have something that is safe and has been involved for many, many years, where millions and millions of people have taken it, we I can explain that to you a little bit why so many people taking it, and in my, that has potential in allowing people that have the DNA to feel even better. Okay, the same way one could get with exercise, but you could also get this as a top of exercise, or with exercise, or without exercise. Okay, to bring about that well-being, because you're balancing what you need in the brain. Now you got onto something that is very important, and that is the profitability, the money-making machinery of what's going on in the world and the pharmaceutical industry per se. Okay, and The thing is this, that for world benefit, number one, no matter what your profit is, you don't want to do the wrong thing. You don't want to go backwards. You don't want to knock out the physiology. You definitely want to balance what you got in your brain and bring about, quotes, homeostasis, which means balance. That makes sense in terms of all mental health or illness, whatever you want to call it. So when we developed this over the many, many, many years, everybody used to say to me, Dr. Bloom, what are you, nuts? This is so cheap. The pharmaceutical industry will never kill you. Because if this really gets to be in the masses, you might get rich, which by the way, that's fine. And I don't care. I'm not a money man. I'm a scientist, and I don't. I mean, money is fine, but that's not the reason why I'm doing this.
Of course.
If I made zero, and this could go out to the world and help so many people, I would cry and say, "Thanks for trying." But the idea that you're going to make a profit on the misery and the suffering and the uncontrollable desire to be okay because of the DNA or whatever and your environment, then why not try to do something like that? In other words, why not? And it's not the matter of the profitability. The profitability, which is in the eyes of the pharmaceutical industry, that's all they really want. Now, some of them might be altruistic because they were really helping people, like David Sachs. Oh, we're really taking away pain for causing death and addiction and be
Yeah.
fined. And he should have been fined more than he was fined. Okay. Like a David
Yeah.
Sackler and Purdue.
Yeah.
The idea is, can you
It's
do something that is cost effective, that is not going to take away so much money from the people, but yet it's going to
the
bring
the
about
painful
them
thing
better?
the painful thing is, of course, definitely. The painful thing is from my seat, from how I see what's happening at the moment, especially, is the fact that you've got a pharmaceutical company which has figured out a way to create demand.
Yes.
It has found a way to create demand, which obviously affecting supply and demand will affect the price and increase their profits, which is such a high motivator where the right thing. Because do people want the right thing, or do they just want to pay into their dopaminergic impulses? And it's in line with what we're always talking about. This
Look,
whole conversation.
yeah.
It's a lot more. People want the addiction. People like the buzz.
I,
They like the social media. They like the drugs. They like the sugar. They like it more than because as we already like a for our own systems and mental health benefit. It'd be very easy to say that we should just eliminate all of them and go back to a simpler time because is what would give every single person the most inner joy and only keep the medication which helps to prevent serious illness and pain.
well,
But
you know, that's the motto of the pharmaceutical company. Okay. I mean, the motto of the pharmaceutical company is they love the fact that there's an addiction out there. They love the fact that people are born with addictive behaviors. They love the fact that there's alcoholism, cocaine, and drugs, and availability of all of this stuff somehow, in some way. They love it. They love the cartels. Okay, they love it because what they what they're making money on is people's struggle. Okay, and they're making a lot of money on it. And look, you can't tell me you're you're going to be 27, I believe. Okay, and think about the pharmaceutical industry. Do you think that they don't know what we are doing? Do you think they
Yeah.
don't know that we have something that can really help people? And if they really was going to help people, they would call me up and say, Dr. Blum, we would like to license this from you. Or Dr. Blum, we would like to promote this. Or Dr. Blum, what we know. Forget about it. They never called me
Yeah.
once in my life. They know it's out there.
And that's
And they don't want to
it's the
hear it.
greatest shame.
They don't want to hear it.
It's the
Because
it's
whether or not what we're talking about is going to fill the bill for everybody, no. But it's going to fill the bill for a whole lot of people, a percentage of people,
it's
a lot of them. And the pharmaceutical, they're not in my life. I went to the pharmaceutical industry in the early 80s. Okay. I sat down with Merck, with their top people. I said, look, there's a substance. It's called D-L-phenylalanine. What? It's amino acid. What? Yeah. And I showed them the data that it reduces alcohol intake in animals and blah. So why don't you put some money in and you can make this into a drug or whatever? They said, we can't do that. D-L-phenylalanine,
yeah.
it's amino acid. That don't even sound like a drug. I said, well, what about hydrocyanic acid? Oh, that sounds good. That's its metabolite. Oh, look, Bailey, we're all smart enough to know that if we had something, forget about me, okay? If there was really something that could truly take care of the brain, balance it, make you feel good, okay? And it was worth $5 on the marketplace. Do you think it would ever get out? No. No.
Yeah.
Because if I was good, you wouldn't want it. Okay? So that's
It
that
seems more than ever.
is a whole discussion of what pharmaceutical industry is doing to people.
Mm.
But
The last thing I'll say on that with the
huh?
pharmaceutical industries, the last thing I'll say on pharmaceutical industries is that it seems more now than ever that the FDA and equivalent government run operations are not police officers, they are gatekeepers.
Right. But now look, there's something else I want to point out. Don't give me the name of RFK Jr., who has no idea. He's dangerous and not a scientist. He says things. And yes, the FDA and the pharmaceutical industry has been in together for years. They have to be. They work hand in hand. Okay? I don't know what's going on between them, but still in all, you need the FDA. Okay? In my
Mm.
opinion. Okay. And you need the pharmaceutical industry.
Yes,
Okay.
you need them. Do they overstep? Yes,
Yeah.
at the same time.
Okay.
So it's a you're doomed if you do, doomed if you
It's a
don't.
conundrum. But
Yeah.
the
Yes.
thing, Bailey, is that there's a lot of things that go on in this world. Before you were born, now you're born, future, that is not correct. And we don't know how to fix it. Okay.
Mm.
And they say the root of all evil is money. Okay. And that means a lot because people are willing to do terrible things in the face of getting money. Okay. And you can be idealistic all you want, but the truth of the matter is, you know, money talks and BS walks. And that's the world that we are living in.
Yeah.
And no matter how much you think you could change it, you can't because it's addictive. It's what
Mm.
people want. You know, I was thinking the other day, I got up and I started thinking, I got another paper accepted. And it made me really happy. Okay. I said, why am I so addicted to getting papers accepted? You know what I mean? Then I said, you know, it's the same reason why people are addicted to money. They got money and they want more and more. The billionaires want more and more and more and more. What the hell are they going to do with all that money? Okay? But it's an addictiveness that you feel, oh my God, I got another $200 billion. Like must. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
It's yes, it ties back into what I was mentioning earlier about my own propensities towards addiction in different ways. And for myself, I try to think that I can pick my own buzz. If I can pick my own buzz, pick where I get my buzz from in the best way possible, which is going to be beneficial towards myself and others, then I'll be in a good shape to carry on, be consistent with that, to do something with that
Right.
long term. Not something that's going to be detrimental to myself, such as drugs or alcohol. Not something that's going to harm other people, but something which I believe can help myself and others if I can actively, intentionally decide what I'm addicted to. Then I can make the most of my own genetic predisposition.
That's exactly.
But yeah, that's how I come to try and look for a willpower based and an intentionality based remedy as opposed to an external drug based way of going about it. And I feel I'm a mentality kind of person. I try to reframe a situation which can help me somewhat as a placebo.
Well, look, uh, I don't know you, and you don't know me.
I feel like I know you quite well.
What?
As much as I can get, I feel like I know you quite well after 2 hours.
Well, well, let's put it this way. First of all, let me say,
Just scratching the surface.
huh? What?
I'm just scratching the surface.
Yeah. But let me say this. You, how could I put this in a big way? Look, you are an epitome in a sense for young people to, instead of worrying about where they're going to do their next dance or whatever they're going to do to make them feel good, or the next piece of jewelry or whatever they're going to do, to use your brain, to have a voice, to do something that is stimulating and important for your generation. That is what you're doing. Okay. And Beatty, that is so positive and so important and so needed. And more people at your age should come out and do this kind of work that you are generating. And I'm not just saying this to be cute or to be nice. I don't have to be cute and nice. I could just be myself. And
You've earned that right.
this is important work. And you got to be proud of it. And you got to think about how important it is for a young person like you to express yourself and to think about life and to think about situations and to bring people in like me and others that may have something to say that may be useful for other people to hear and think about. So, in essence, in good and welfare, okay, what you're doing is fantabulous. Be happy about it.
Thank you, Kenneth. I try to optimize for enjoyment as much as I can, and this is what I found drew me into having these kind of conversations,
Yeah.
and I love it to pieces.
Yeah.
I love it to pieces.
What?
I love it to pieces. I love it to pieces.
Yeah.
I really enjoy it, and
So
it's
it,
something I want to continue to do.
yeah. So that's real important now. I hope I made myself clear in what we were talking about. and I hope it has some benefit for some people. And
Definitely, I believe so.
I will send you. I got your email. I'll send you a couple of papers, some stuff that you weren't aware of. I'll send you some stuff so you could further do it and keep on uh, your road of success. And by the way, could I ask you a
Thank you.
question? Are you
Yes.
are you finished school or are you going more?
Yes.
Huh?
Finished, yes.
You didn't finish yet. Oh,
I didn't so I didn't go to university.
oh, you didn't. Oh, okay,
I didn't know.
okay,
I decided not to, because I wasn't sure of what area I wanted to go into at the time,
yeah,
and as time went by, I kinda carved my own way. So,
yeah. So, what are you doing? Can I ask you what are you actually doing with right now other than this? I mean, you must be working someplace, or
well,
yeah,
this for work, and then also I, I'm a personal trainer and work within childcare at the same time. So, personal training, I've lots to do with the physical body, mental body. I love how that works, and then especially with children, coaching children, seeing the psychology and how that adapts
oh,
throughout
okay,
our
oh,
lives and how those influences affect us
oh,
as we
that's
grow older.
yeah, that's great. Yeah,
It
look,
all ties in somehow.
huh? What?
It all ties in somehow.
Yeah. I mean, look, you're doing whatever you're doing with a heart and with care. And that's what counts. And I'm sure you're doing a great job. Okay. And with that, I could say namaste. Uh, thank you very, very much for inviting me to talk with you. Okay.
No,
Appreciate
Kenneth,
it.
thank you. I really appreciate it more than you know. You've lived a life filled with this area of expertise, and I'm sure you've been from listening to you speak now, even at 85 years old, you are passionate, you're fiery, you've got that energy and still looking to release more and more papers, whether it's addictive or whether it's not, maybe it's your life's purpose, maybe it's more deeper and mystical than that, who knows? But I am grateful, and there's millions and millions, if not billions of people in this generation alone who are alive today who will massively benefit from your work and ongoing from
Well,
that. And I look forward to seeing where it goes. And I thank you, and
right.
we'll leave it there.
I want to say one more thing.
Please do.
My girlfriend's from Australia, from Sydney, right?
Yes,
And if we come down to Sydney, we're gonna look you up and we're
please
gonna have
do.
dinner.
You've got my email. Yes, of course, definitely. I'd love to make it happen, Kenneth. That'd be amazing.
Thanks, Billy. Thank you for everything.